Elena's hands were covered in blood. Not just any blood, the Alpha King's blood. It pulsed hot and thick between her fingers as she pressed against the gaping wound in his chest, her palms slick with it, her arms trembling from the pressure she was applying. They were deep in the Forbidden Forest, 3 days after the invasion, and the world had narrowed to this: his labored breathing, the spreading darkness of his blood on the moss beneath them, and the circling sounds of enemy wolves in the trees around them. "Don't you dare die on me," she hissed through clenched teeth, and she hated that her voice broke, hated that tears were streaming down her face and mixing with the dirt and blood smeared across her cheeks. Not after everything. Not after... She couldn't finish. Couldn't say what had changed between them in these 3 desperate days. Dimitri's eyes, those steel-gray eyes that had once looked at her with such cold indifference, flickered open. Blood stained his lips as he managed something that might have been a smile. "Still hate me, little wolf?" "Yes." The word came out strangled, broken. "More than ever. So you don't get to leave." His hand, so much larger than hers, lifted with obvious effort to touch her face. His fingers left red streaks across her jaw. Liar. Around them, the forest had gone too quiet. The rogues were closing in. She could smell them now. Unwashed bodies, bloodlust, victory. They had maybe minutes, maybe less, and she had one chance to save him. The blood bond. The ancient magic that could heal even fatal wounds, but at a price that made her stomach twist with something between terror and longing. It would tie them together for life. Their souls, their wolves, their very essences bound in a way that could never be undone. The very thing she had sworn on her brother's grave, she would never do with him. "Elena." His voice was fading. Each word cost him. "Don't. You'll be trapped. With me." Her laugh was harsh, nearly hysterical. She could hear movement in the underbrush now. 30 seconds, maybe less. "Then we're both trapped." She didn't give him time to argue, didn't give herself time to reconsider. Her wolf surged forward as she bit into her own wrist, hard enough to draw blood, and pressed it against his wound. The ancient words came from somewhere deep in her DNA, a language older than kingdoms or kings. Magic blazed between them, white-hot and blinding. Their eyes locked, and Elena felt the exact moment the bond snapped into place. It was like lightning striking her chest, like a door slamming open in her soul to let him in. She felt his pain, his fading strength, his guilt and regret, and something else. Something that made her breath catch, even as power flooded through her and into him. The wound began to close. And 3 days earlier, none of this had seemed even remotely possible. The grand hall of the Crystal Palace was everything Elena remembered and more. Soaring ceilings, carved with the history of the werewolf kingdoms. Chandeliers that caught the afternoon light and scattered it into 1,000 rainbows. Floors so polished she could see her reflection. A ghost of who she used to be when her family had stood in these halls as nobility instead of exiles. She stood near the back of the assembled crowd, her borrowed formal dress itching against skin more accustomed to the rough fabrics of exile. The diplomatic summit had required representatives from all pacts, even the smaller, less significant ones like Greyhaven, where her family had been taken in after their banishment. 5 years. It had been 5 years since Alpha King Dmitri Volkov had signed the order that destroyed her life. "All rise for His Majesty, Alpha King Dmitri Volkov, first of his name, sovereign of the Northern Territories, protector of the Packlands." The crowd rose as one. Elena rose with them, but her jaw was clenched so tight her teeth ached. Then he entered, and despite everything, despite the hate that had sustained her through 5 years of hardship and loss, she had to admit he was magnificent. Dmitry Volkov moved like violence barely contained in human form. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and those infamous gray eyes that missed nothing. He wore power like other men wore cloaks, natural and absolute. At 26, he was young for an alpha king, but no one questioned his authority. No one dared. He'd made sure of that with swift, brutal examples, her family among them. The ceremony was tedious, treaties signed, alliances reaffirmed, the usual political theater. Elena kept her eyes down, her wolf restless beneath her skin. Just a few more hours, then she could return to Greyhaven and never see this place, or him, again. "You there, in the blue dress!" Elena's head snapped up. The hall had gone silent. Every eye turned to her. The Alpha King was looking directly at her. "Step forward," Dmitry commanded, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. Her legs moved before her brain could fully process the terror flooding her system. She walked forward through the parting crowd, feeling like she was moving through water, until she stood at the base of the dais where the throne, his throne, dominated the room. "Name yourself," he said, and there was something in his expression she couldn't read. Curiosity, perhaps, or suspicion. "Elena Ashford, Your Majesty, of Greyhaven Pack." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Ashford." He leaned forward slightly, and she saw the moment recognition sparked. "That name sounds familiar." The fury that rose in her chest was so sudden and complete, it stole her breath. He'd destroyed everything, her family's honor, her brother's life, her parents' spirits, and he couldn't even remember clearly. "You exiled my family for treason they didn't commit." The words escaped before wisdom could stop them. The hall collectively gasped. Dimitri's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. "I exile many traitors. I can't recall them all." "Then maybe you should rule with less cruelty and more memory, Your Majesty." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. Around her, wolves who had lived through Dimitri's early reign, when he'd consolidated power with ruthless efficiency, looked at her with something between horror and pity. Two guards stepped forward, hands on their weapons. Dmitry raised one hand. They stopped. He stood, and it felt like a mountain rising. He descended the steps until he was directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the exact shade of gray in his eyes, storm clouds before lightning. "You're brave or foolish," he said quietly, his voice for her alone. "I haven't decided which." "Does it matter?" She met his gaze, refusing to lower her eyes in submission. "The result is the same." Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. "You're dismissed, Elena Ashford. But you're confined to the palace for the duration of the summit. 3 more days. Try not to commit any actual treason in that time." He turned away, returning to his throne, and the ceremony continued as if nothing had happened. But as Elena was escorted, not roughly but firmly, from the hall, she felt his eyes on her back, watching, assessing. She told herself the shiver that ran down her spine was fear. It was definitely fear. That night, Dmitry Volkov stood at the window of his private study, looking out over the palace grounds and seeing nothing. "You should have had her arrested." Marcus, his head of palace security, stood near the door, his posture rigid with disapproval. "That level of disrespect cannot be tolerated." "She spoke truth," Dmitry said quietly. "Should I punish truth now?" "She accused you of cruelty in open court." "She accused me of poor memory, which, regarding the Ashford case, is accurate." Dmitry turned from the window. "Pull the file." Marcus hesitated. "Your Majesty, now." 10 minutes later, Dmitry was reading through documents he'd signed 5 years ago, when he'd been barely 21 and newly crowned, his father's blood still metaphorically wet on his hands. The Ashford case. Treason. Collusion with rival packs. evidence provided by his uncle, Lord Cassius, who'd served as his chief advisor in those early chaotic months. Evidence that Dmitri now knew, had known for 4 years, had been fabricated. He discovered the truth 6 months after the Ashford exile, when other inconsistencies in his uncle's counsel had become impossible to ignore. The investigation had been quiet, thorough, and devastating. Cassius had been the traitor, manipulating the young king, eliminating rival families who might question his influence. Dmitri had executed Cassius personally. Swift, final, justice served. But he'd never recalled the families his uncle had destroyed. To do so would have been to admit he'd been deceived, manipulated, weak. In those early days, with enemies circling and his authority constantly challenged, showing weakness meant death. So he'd chosen the crown over justice. He'd chosen survival over honor. And families like the Ashfords had paid the price. "She's right to hate me," Dmitri said softly, closing the file. "I was cruel. And worse, I was a coward. You were a king doing what was necessary. Leave me, Marcus." After his guard departed, Dmitri returned to the window. Somewhere in this palace, Elena Ashford was trapped for 3 more days. The girl whose brother had died in exile, whose family had been shattered, whose life he'd casually destroyed in the name of political expedience. The girl who'd looked at him with such pure, uncomplicated hatred. He wondered why that bothered him more than all the other enemies he'd made. He wondered why he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd refused to lower her eyes. The explosion that tore through the palace's east wing came at midnight. Elena jerked awake in the small guest room she'd been assigned, the sound of shattering glass and screaming cutting through the fog of sleep. Her wolf surged to the surface, all instinct, as smoke began seeping under her door. She was dressed and moving in seconds, throwing open the door to chaos. The corridor was filled with smoke and running wolves. A guard stumbled past, clutching his throat where blood spurted between his fingers. Through the haze, Elena could see flames eating through the far end of the hallway. This wasn't an accident. This was an attack. Her wolf howled for her to shift, to fight, but she forced control. In these narrow corridors, her human form was more useful. She grabbed a fallen guard's knife. The wolf was dead, his eyes still open, and ran. The palace was a maze even without smoke and panic, but Elena had studied the layout during her previous life here, when her father had brought her to court functions. She navigated by memory and instinct, heading for the servant passages that honeycombed the palace walls. She nearly made it. Something slammed into her from the side. Another body, heavy and moving fast. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the marble floor. Elena came up with the knife ready, prepared to drive it into her attacker's throat. She stopped. "You," Alpha King Dmitri Volkov said, his gray eyes wide with something that might have been recognition or surprise. Blood ran from a gash on his shoulder, soaking through his torn shirt. "You," Elena echoed, frozen. For one heartbeat, they stared at each other. Then another explosion rocked the building, closer this time, and the ceiling began to crack. "Move!" Dmitri grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet, pulling her down the corridor away from the spreading fire. "This way." "I know where I'm going." "Not anymore. The main routes are compromised." "Then let go of me and I'll find my own way out." He did let go, so suddenly she stumbled. "Fine. Die if you want. I have no time for—" A pack of rogues burst around the corner ahead of them. 6 wolves, already shifted, their eyes reflecting the firelight like demons. They saw the king and howled. "Alternatively," Dmitri said, his voice dropping into something cold and deadly, "we could survive this together and resume our mutual hatred later." Elena looked at the rogues, then at the king, then back at the rogues. Her wolf was screaming at her to run, to leave him, to let him face the consequences of his cruelty alone. But survival instinct was stronger than hate. "There's a servant's passage behind that tapestry," she said quickly, pointing to the wall to their left. "It leads to the lower levels." "I know." He was already moving, and so was she. "There's a passage from the wine cellars to the forest beyond the walls. If we can reach it before—" The rogues charged. Dmitri shoved Elena toward the tapestry and turned to meet them. She saw him shift in that fluid, terrifying way alphas could, mid-stride, mid-breath. One moment a man, the next, a massive silver-gray wolf with fangs that caught the firelight. The first rogue never knew what hit him. Dmitri's jaws closed on his throat and tore it out in a spray of blood. The second rogue fared no better, his spine snapping under the alpha's weight. But there were 4 more, and Dmitri was bleeding. Elena shifted. Her wolf was smaller, russet brown instead of silver, but she was fast. She hit the third rogue from the side, her fangs finding the vulnerable spot beneath his jaw. He went down thrashing, and she was already moving, trusting her instincts. Trust was a strong word. She was trusting her survival instinct, not him. Together, they drove the rogues back. Dmitri fought with brutal efficiency, every movement economical and lethal. Elena matched him, covering his wounded side, moving in patterns that felt eerily synchronized for 2 wolves who'd never hunted together. The last rogue fled. Smart. They shifted back simultaneously, both breathing hard, covered in blood and smoke. "You fight well," Dmitri said. "Had to learn. No pack protection after you exiled us." She yanked the tapestry aside, revealing the hidden door. "Going to thank me for saving your life, Your Majesty? Going to thank me for saving yours? You started this fight." The rogues started this fight. Another explosion, this one so close the floor buckled beneath them. The ceiling groaned. "Truce?" Dmitri asked. "Until we're clear of this death trap. Then I never want to see you again." Agreed. They plunged into darkness together, the sounds of the burning palace following them down into the depths. The passage was everything Elena remembered from her childhood. Narrow, damp, smelling of old stone and mildew. They moved by touch as much as by sight, their enhanced vision helping, but not enough in the absolute darkness. Dmitri was in front, his wounded shoulder leaving a trail of blood drops that she could smell, even if she couldn't see them. "You're bleeding too much," she said after 10 minutes of descent. "We need to stop and—" "We stop when we're clear of the blast radius. They used enough explosives to bring down the whole east wing. The tunnels may collapse." As if to punctuate his words, dust rained down from above. The stone shuddered. They moved faster. By the time they reached the wine cellar, or what remained of it, half the ceiling had collapsed, they were both coated in dust and stumbling from exhaustion. The passage to the outside was still clear, thank the moon, a narrow tunnel that sloped upward. Fresh air hit Elena's face like a blessing. They emerged into the forest behind the palace grounds, far enough from the main structure that the sounds of battle were muted. Through the trees, she could see flames lighting up the night sky, the palace silhouetted against orange and red. "They planned this," Dmitri said quietly, leaning against a tree and pressing his hand to his bleeding shoulder. "This wasn't opportunistic. This was coordinated." "Your own people?" Elena asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't her business, wasn't her concern if his brutal reign had finally generated enough hatred to spark revolution. "Not my people." His voice was hard. "Look at the attack pattern. They breached the east wing first, the guest quarters, then the throne room. Then they box in the survivors and eliminate them systematically. This is military precision." "So what? You have enemies. Shocking development." He looked at her, and even bloodied and exhausted, his gaze was intense enough to make her wolf stir uneasily. "They'll come after survivors. Anyone who escaped will be hunted down." "Then I suggest you run very fast, Your Majesty. I'm heading to Greyhaven." She turned to leave. "Elena." She hated that she stopped. Hated that something in the way he said her name made her pause. The Forbidden Forest lies between here and any Allied territory, Dmitri said. 3 days of hard travel through unmapped wilderness. Alone, wounded, with rogues hunting me. I likely won't make it. I sincerely hope you don't. Fair enough. He pushed away from the tree, swaying slightly. But they'll hunt you too. You were seen with me. You fought beside me. In their eyes, you're compromised. Elena's blood went cold. He was right. She'd seen the rogues' faces when she'd fought alongside the king. She'd been marked. So what are you suggesting? 3 days. We travel together through the forest, watch each other's backs, reach Allied territory. Then we part ways and never speak again. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. This man had destroyed her life. Her brother was dead because of him. Her parents were broken shells because of him. But her brother was dead because he'd gotten sick in exile, in a pack without adequate healers. And if she died in this forest, her parents would have lost both their children. Survival first, revenge later. 3 days, she said coldly. Then I never want to see your face again. Agreed. They headed deeper into the Forbidden Forest, and behind them, the palace continued to burn. The Forbidden Forest earned its name. Ancient trees, thick as houses, blocked out the moonlight, their branches forming a canopy so dense it felt like walking through a cathedral at midnight. Strange sounds echoed through the darkness, howls that weren't quite wolf, rustling that was too deliberate to be wind. The forest's magic was old, predating pack territories and kingdoms. It didn't follow wolf law. It didn't care about alphas or omegas or anything in between. It simply was, vast and indifferent and dangerous. Elena had been walking for an hour, her senses on high alert, when she heard Dmitri stumble behind her. She turned. He'd caught himself against a tree, but his face had gone pale beneath the dirt and blood. "Your shoulder," she said flatly. "It's fine. You're bleeding through your fingers. That's not fine. I can walk." "Then stop stumbling like a drunk bear." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "Has anyone ever told you that you're remarkably unsympathetic? Only to tyrants who deserve it." She looked around, spotted an outcropping of rock that formed a shallow cave. "There, we stop for a few hours. I'll tend the wound." "We should keep moving." "You'll collapse in another mile. Then I'll have to leave you, and honestly, I'm not sure my conscience can take that." She didn't wait for his agreement, just headed for the cave. Inside, it was dry and smelled of earth and stone, safe enough for a brief rest. Elena gathered some relatively dry moss, while Dmitri leaned against the cave wall, his breathing too labored. "Shirt off," she ordered. He raised an eyebrow. "Don't flatter yourself. I've seen plenty of bare chests. Yours is." "Nothing special." "Liar," he said. But he was shrugging carefully out of the remains of his shirt. Elena's breath caught despite herself. Not because of his physique, though that was admittedly impressive in the way of warriors who'd spent their lives training, but because of the scars. They covered him. Long, raised lines that spoke of close combat. Puncture wounds from fangs. One particularly brutal scar that wrapped around his ribs like something had tried to disembowel him. "War wounds," Dmitri said quietly. "Every alpha who challenged my claim to the throne left a mark." "How many challenged you?" 12, in the first year alone. She didn't want to feel sympathy, didn't want to imagine what it must have been like to be 21 and fighting for your life against experienced warriors, your authority questioned at every turn, every decision a potential death sentence. She focused on the wound instead. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. In the dim light filtering in the cave, she could see the edges were ragged, a rogue's claws probably. "This needs stitches," she said. "We don't have supplies." She pulled a small medical kit from her dress pocket. At his surprised look, she shrugged. "I learned to carry basics after exile. You never know when you'll need them." Elena worked in silence, cleaning the wound with alcohol from her kit. Dmitri hissed, but didn't pull away, then stitching with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times. Her brother had been clumsy, always getting hurt. She'd learned field medicine because she'd had to. "Where did you learn this?" Dmitri asked quietly, watching her hands. "Had to, after you exiled us. No pack protection, no pack healers." She tied off another stitch, not gently. "My brother got sick 2 years into exile. Simple infection. Would have been nothing with proper medical care." Dmitri said nothing for a long moment. Then, "What was his name?" "Marcus." She finished the last stitch, her hands suddenly unsteady. "He was 14. Wanted to be a warrior like our father. Instead, he died coughing blood in a cheap room in Greyhaven because we couldn't afford the antibiotics." The silence in the cave was suffocating. "I'm sorry," Dmitri said finally. "Sorry doesn't raise the dead." She packed away her supplies, not looking at him. "Get some rest. We move at dawn." She moved to the opposite side of the small cave, as far from him as possible. But in the darkness, she could still feel his presence, still smell his blood, and the peculiar scent of his wolf, storm and stone, and something wild. She told herself the ache in her chest was just exhaustion. She told herself she didn't notice when his breathing finally evened out in sleep. She told herself she wasn't standing guard while he rested, protecting a man she'd sworn to hate. But wolves were terrible liars, even to themselves. Elena woke to growling. She was on her feet instantly, knife in hand, her wolf surging forward. The cave entrance was blocked by 3 massive shapes. Feral wolves, their eyes reflecting the pre-dawn light, foam flecking their muzzles. Not rogues, ferals. Worse. Rogues had rejected pack law, but retained their intelligence. Ferals had lost themselves entirely to their wolves, becoming nothing more than animals. Unpredictable, vicious, deadly. Beside her, Dmitri rose smoothly, despite his wounded shoulder. "Stay behind me." "Try that again and I'll stab you myself." Elena shifted, her wolf eager for the fight. The ferals attacked as one. Elena had fought plenty of times in her life. In exile, you learned to defend yourself or you died. But she'd never fought beside an alpha like this. Dmitri moved like violence incarnate, even wounded. He caught the first feral by the throat mid-leap, his jaws locking down with crushing force. The crack of bones was audible, even over the snarling. Elena took the second feral, using her smaller size to her advantage. She went low, aiming for the legs, bringing the bigger wolf down. Her fangs found the jugular before it could recover. The third feral, seeing its packmates fall, hesitated. That hesitation cost it. Dmitri and Elena attacked simultaneously, instinct driving them to move as a unit. They brought it down in seconds. Then silence. Just their heavy breathing and the coppery smell of blood. They shifted back, both covered in gore. "You fight well," Dmitri said, examining a new scratch along his ribs. "You already said that." "It's worth repeating. Where did you train?" "I didn't. I survived." She walked to the cave entrance, looking out at the forest. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the dense canopy. "We should move. Ferals hunt in larger packs during the day." "Elena." She turned. He was standing there, bloody and battered, and looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You could have let them take me. Should have, probably." "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this forest." She grabbed her pack. "And don't think one cooperative fight changes anything between us. In 3 days, we part ways, and you go back to being the tyrant who destroyed my life." "Fair enough." They left the cave together, and if their shoulders almost brushed as they walked, neither mentioned it. The second day in the Forbidden Forest was harder than the first. They were deeper now, in parts of the woodland that hadn't seen human, or wolf, activity in decades. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than houses, their roots forming cathedral-like arches overhead. Bioluminescent fungi grew in patches, casting eerie blue light that made everything look like an underwater scene. They'd seen no rogues, but Elena didn't trust the silence. Predators were often quietest when they were closest. "Tell me something," Dmitri said around midday, breaking hours of silence. They were following what might have been a game trail, single file, Elena in front, because her senses were sharper. "Why should I tell you anything?" "Because we're going to be walking together for another day and a half, and the silence is becoming oppressive." "Good. Suffer in silence." "Why do you hate small talk as much as you hate me?" Despite herself, Elena almost laughed. "I don't hate small talk. I hate small talk with you." "Fair distinction." He paused. "Why did you really help me back there, with the ferals?" She didn't answer immediately, stepping over a fallen log thick with moss. The truth was complicated. "Because despite everything you've done, you're still alpha of my people. And because—" She stopped walking, turned to face him. "Because I need to know something." "What?" "Why did you really exile my family?" The forest seemed to hold its breath. Dmitri looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his gray eyes. "The evidence was compelling," he said finally. "It was fabricated. I know that now." Elena's world tilted. "What?" "6 months after your exile, I discovered the real traitor." His voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone confessing to a crime they couldn't undo. "My uncle, Lord Cassius. He'd been manipulating me since my father's assassination, eliminating families whose loyalty he questioned by planting evidence of treason." The fury that rose in Elena was so sudden and complete she couldn't breathe. "You knew? For years you knew and never—" "I had him executed," Dmitri interrupted. "I made it slow, made it hurt. But I couldn't recall your family without admitting I'd been deceived. Do you understand what that would have meant? I was barely 22, surrounded by enemies, my authority questioned at every turn. If I'd admitted weakness—" Elena attacked him. She didn't shift, didn't think, just launched herself at him with all the grief and rage of 5 years. They went down hard, her hands finding his throat, tears streaming down her face. "My brother died!" she was screaming, sobbing, hitting him. "He died, and you knew we were innocent, and you let us rot in exile for your goddamn pride!" Dmitri didn't fight back. He could have. He was stronger, trained, deadly. But he just lay there and took it, even when her fist connected with his face, his chest, his wounded shoulder. "I know," he said quietly, and the devastation in his voice finally penetrated her rage. "I know, Elena. I was wrong. I was a coward. I chose my crown over justice, over what was right, over the lives of innocent people, and I've regretted it every single day since." She collapsed on top of him, her strength suddenly gone, sobs racking her body. All the grief she'd held back for 2 years, since Marcus died, since she'd had to be strong for her parents, since she'd had to survive instead of mourning, came pouring out. "He was just a kid," she whispered into Dmitri's chest. "He was just a stupid, clumsy kid who wanted to make our father proud. And he died because you were too much of a coward to admit you were wrong." "I know." His arms came up carefully, hesitantly, and when she didn't pull away, they closed around her. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry. Those words are worthless, I know, but I don't have anything better to offer." They lay there on the forest floor, predator and prey, enemy and enemy, while Elena cried herself dry and Dmitri held her and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were swollen. She looked terrible and felt worse. "I can't forgive you," she said. "I don't expect you to." "But She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the confusing tangle of emotions in her chest. The hate that was still there, but somehow less sharp. The grief that felt slightly less suffocating now that she'd finally released it. And something else. Something she didn't have a name for. "We should keep moving," she said finally, standing and brushing dirt and leaves from her clothes. Dmitri stood more slowly. His face was bruised from where she'd hit him, his lip split. He didn't comment on it. They walked in silence for a while. But it was different now. Softer, less brittle. "Tell me about him," Dmitri said eventually. "About Marcus." "Why?" "Because he mattered. Because you loved him. Because I owe you at least that much." So Elena told him. About her baby brother, who'd been born late in their parents' lives. A surprise blessing. About how he'd followed her everywhere as a toddler, determined to do everything his big sister did. About how he'd wanted to be a warrior, but was too clumsy, too gangly, always tripping over his own feet. About how he'd had a laugh that could fill a room, and a heart too big for the cruel world they'd been thrown into. And as she talked, Dmitri listened in a way she'd never experienced. Not just hearing, but truly listening, absorbing every word like he was cataloging them, honoring them. By the time night fell and they made camp near a small stream, something had shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not even friendship, but a fragile truce that went deeper than survival. They sat by the water, too risky to build a fire, sharing dried meat from Elena's pack. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "I thought you hated small talk with me." "This isn't small talk." "Then ask." "What happened to you to make you," she gestured vaguely, "like this, cold, absolute, the kind of king who exiles families based on fabricated evidence?" Dmitri was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I became Alpha King at 19. My father was assassinated during a summit, poisoned. I watched him die over 3 days, unable to do anything while he choked on his own blood." Elena's breath caught. "The moment he died, 12 alphas challenged my claim. I was too young, they said, too inexperienced, too weak. And they were right, I was all those things. But I was also desperate and terrified and determined not to lose the only thing my father had left me." He picked up a pebble, tossed it into the stream. "So I became what I had to be to survive. I made myself cold so that every decision wouldn't break me. I made myself absolute so that no one would question my authority. I made myself cruel so that my enemies would fear me." "And you forgot how to be anything else," Elena said softly. "Yes." He looked at her, and in the moonlight she could see the man beneath the king, young, exhausted, carrying weight that would have crushed someone weaker. "I forgot. And by the time I remembered, I'd already done too much damage to undo it." "What happened to your uncle, after you discovered his treason?" Dmitri's expression went cold, remote. "I called him to my private chambers, told him I knew everything. He tried to justify it, said he was protecting the kingdom, protecting me, doing what was necessary. I listened to all of it. Then I shifted and tore his throat out." The casual way he said it should have terrified her. Instead, Elena felt a grim satisfaction. Good. Not good. Necessary. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a while, the forest sounds a gentle backdrop. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. Water burbled over smooth stones. "What happened to your family?" Dmitri asked, "after the exile?" Elena pulled her knees to her chest. "We went to Greyhaven. Small pack, but they took us in. My father, he was never the same. He'd been a respected warrior, an advisor. Suddenly he was nothing. Nobody. It broke something in him." "And your mother?" "Died 6 months after Marcus. Just gave up. Her heart, the healers said. But I knew better. She'd lost a son and a husband. The man she married had died even if his body kept moving. She didn't want to keep going without them. And you were left alone. Yes. Elena rested her chin on her knees. 17 years old and alone. So I did what I had to do to survive. Took any work I could find. Learned to fight, to hunt, to take care of myself. Built a new life from nothing. You're stronger than I am, Dmitri said quietly. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I didn't have a choice. You get to be a king. I just get to survive. Do you know what I envy most about you? When she looked at him, startled, he continued. You still know who you are beneath all the damage. You're angry, yes, and hurt, and hardened by life. But you're still fundamentally you. I look in the mirror sometimes and don't recognize the person looking back. Then change. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Elena turned to face him fully. You think you're the only person who's made terrible choices? The only one who's hurt people? We all have scars, Dmitri. Yours are just more visible because you wear a crown. But you get to choose, every single day, whether to keep being the person your trauma made you, or to become someone better. And how do I do that? Start by recalling the families your uncle destroyed. Publicly admit you were wrong. Make amends where you can. Be the king your father would have wanted you to be, not the one your fear made you become. He stared at her like she'd suggested he could fly. You really think it's that simple? I think it's that hard. But hard doesn't mean impossible. She stood, brushing off her pants. Get some rest. We have a long day tomorrow. As Elena settled on the far side of their makeshift camp, she felt his eyes on her. When she looked back, he was still watching, something unreadable in his expression. Elena? What? Thank you, for being honest with me. Don't thank me yet. I still hate you. I know. He lay back, looking up at the canopy of stars visible through the trees. But maybe a little less than before? She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because he was right, and that terrified her more than anything in this dangerous forest. She was starting to see him as a person instead of a symbol, and that was dangerous in ways that ferals and rogues could never be. The third day dawned gray and cold. Elena woke first, her wolf uneasy. Something was wrong with the forest. Too quiet, the birds silent, even the insects still. It was the kind of quiet that preceded violence. Dmitri, she shook his shoulder. We need to move, now. He was awake instantly, decades of survival instinct overriding any grogginess. What is it? They're close. I can feel it. They packed in silence and started moving, but Elena knew they were running out of time. The robes had been tracking them all along, patient, methodical, letting them exhaust themselves before moving in for the kill. Smart, terrifying, professional. Around mid-morning, they reached a ridge that gave them a view of the forest below. In the distance, Elena could see smoke, multiple columns of it. Allied territory, Dmitri said, pointing. Less than 5 miles. So close. They were so close. A howl echoed through the forest behind them. Then another. Then a dozen more, forming a chorus that made Elena's blood run cold. They're boxing us in, Dmitri said, grimly, driving us toward something. An ambush? Probably. They looked at each other, and something passed between them. Understanding, acceptance, defiance. We can try to slip past them, Elena said. We won't make it. They're too coordinated. Dmitri checked his wound, nearly healed, thanks to his alpha biology. We fight. We'll be outnumbered. We've been outnumbered before. Elena thought about that, about the ferals they'd defeated together, moving like they'd been hunting as a pack for years instead of days. About how she'd protected his flank and he'd covered hers, instinct driving them into perfect synchronization. If we're going to die, she said. "I want you to know something." "What?" "I don't hate you as much as I did 3 days ago." Despite everything, he smiled. "High praise." "Don't let it go to your head." The rogues attacked from 3 sides simultaneously, a dozen wolves, all large, all experienced fighters. They'd been chosen specifically for this hunt. Elena and Dmitri shifted as one and met them head-on. The fight was chaos. Elena had trained in combat, but she'd never faced anything like this. Professional soldiers who moved as a unit, covering each other's weaknesses, exploiting any opening. She took down one rogue, then another, her jaws finding throats and spines with desperate efficiency. Beside her, Dmitri fought like the warrior king he'd been forged into. Every movement was economical, lethal, beautiful in its brutality. He was wounded, reopening the shoulder injury, blood matting his silver fur, but he didn't slow. They were magnificent together. They were also losing. 2 rogues became 3, became 5, and there were simply too many. Elena felt teeth sink into her flank, agony lancing through her. She twisted, broke free, but another rogue was already there, driving her back. She was separated from Dmitri now, a wall of enemies between them. She could hear him fighting, hear the snarls and snaps, but she couldn't reach him. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze. Dmitri's howl of pain. Elena fought with renewed desperation, clawing through the rogues, and burst through to see Dmitri, human now, collapsed against a tree, with a sword through his chest. Not a wolf's attack, a human weapon. Standing over him, blade dripping red, was a man Elena recognized from the palace. Marcus, head of palace security, Dmitri's most trusted guard. "Marcus," Dmitri gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. "You?" "You grew weak," Marcus said, his voice cold with contempt. "You let that girl make you soft. The kingdom needs strength, not mercy." Elena attacked. She didn't shift back, just launched herself at Marcus with every ounce of rage and terror in her body. He tried to bring the sword around, but she was too fast, too desperate. Her jaws closed on his throat, and she tore it out, savage and final. He fell, dying, and she was already shifting, stumbling to Dmitri's side. "No, no, no!" Her hands found the wound, a sword through his chest, missing his heart by inches but not by enough. Blood was everywhere, too much blood, pooling beneath him and soaking into the forest floor. The rogues had scattered when their leader fell, but they wouldn't stay gone long. "Elena," Dmitri's voice was weak, fading. "Leave. You can make it." "Shut up," she was crying, pressing her hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Don't you dare die on me. Not after everything. Not after—" "Still hate me, little wolf?" "Yes." The word came out strangled, broken. "More than ever. So you don't get to leave." His hand lifted, trembling, and touched her face. Left red streaks across her jaw. Liar. She could feel him fading, could feel his life slipping away beneath her hands. In minutes, maybe less, he would be gone. But there was one way. The blood bond. Ancient magic, forbidden in most pacts because of its permanence. If she blood bonded with him, his accelerated healing would be amplified through her connection. Enough to save him from even a fatal wound. But it would bind them together for life. She would feel his emotions, his pain, his presence always. They would be linked in a way that couldn't be broken short of death. She would be tied forever to the man who destroyed her life. "Elena," his eyes were closing. "Don't. You'll be trapped with me." Around them, she could hear movement in the trees, the rogues regrouping. She had maybe a minute before they attacked again. 1 minute to decide. She thought about her brother, about how Marcus had died because she hadn't been there to protect him. about her parents, broken by this man's choices. She thought about the past 3 days, his confession, his regret, the glimpses of the person he'd been before the crown had hardened him. She thought about the way he'd held her while she cried, the way he'd listened to stories about her brother like they mattered, the way he'd fought beside her like they were packmates instead of enemies. She thought about how, despite everything, she didn't want him to die. "Then we're both trapped," she said, and bit into her wrist. The pain was sharp, immediate, but she ignored it. She pressed her bleeding wrist to his chest wound and began the ancient words, the language her grandmother had taught her when she was young, before exile, before loss, before everything had gone wrong. Magic blazed between them, white-hot, blinding, all-consuming. Their eyes locked, and Elena felt the exact moment the bond snapped into place. It was like lightning striking her chest, like a door slamming open in her soul. Suddenly she could feel him, his fading strength, his shock, his pain, but also his guilt, his regret, his desperate determination to protect her even as he died. And beneath all of that, something else. Something that made her breath catch, even as power flooded through her and into him. Wonder, gratitude, and something that felt terrifyingly like love. The wound began to close, flesh knitting together with impossible speed. The blood stopped flowing. Color returned to his face. Dmitri gasped, his eyes going wide. "What did you? I saved you, you ungrateful bastard!" Her voice was shaking. "Now get up. We have rogues to kill." His hand caught hers, stopping her from pulling away. Through the bond, she could feel what he was feeling. Amazement, confusion, guilt, and that other thing. That terrifying thing she didn't want to name. "You bonded with me," he said. "Yes." "You hate me." "Yes." "But you bonded with me anyway." "Apparently I'm an idiot." She pulled her hand free and stood, swaying slightly. The bond magic had taken more out of her than she'd expected. "Now get up, they're coming back." But when the rogues emerged from the trees, they weren't attacking. They were backing away, their ears flat, their tails low. Because where there had been a wounded king and an exhausted girl, there was now a bonded pair. And bonded wolves were twice as strong as individuals, their powers amplified through their connection. The rogues turned and fled. Elena and Dmitri stood there, bloody and exhausted, and bound together in ways neither had planned, and watched their enemies disappear into the forest. "Well," Dmitri said finally, "that happened." Elena laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "That's your response? That happened?" "I don't know the proper etiquette for when someone saves your life with an eternal soul bond while you're bleeding out in a forest. Try thank you and see how that feels." "Thank you." He turned to her, and through the bond, she could feel the sincerity beneath the words. "Elena, thank you. You didn't have to." "No, I didn't." She met his eyes. "But I did. So let's not make this weird by discussing it." "How could it possibly get weirder?" "Fair point." She looked down at herself, covered in blood, dirt, torn clothing. "We should keep moving. Ally territory is close." "Elena." "What?" "I can feel you, your emotions, your wolf." "I know. I can feel you too." And she could. A constant presence at the edge of her consciousness, like a second heartbeat. "You're terrified," he said softly. "Of course I'm terrified. I just tied myself for life to the man who destroyed my family." "I won't." He stopped. "I don't know how to make this right." "Then figure it out. Because I didn't save your life just to be stuck with the same tyrant who exiled us." She started walking toward the Allied territory, her steps unsteady but determined. "You wanted to change? Now you have to. Because I'll be there, in your head, feeling every choice you make. And I won't let you be that person anymore." Through the bond, she felt his shock, his realization, his slowly dawning understanding. She'd given him the one thing he'd said he needed, someone who could see him, truly see him, and hold him accountable. "You're terrifying," he said, catching up to her. "Good. Remember that." They walked in silence for a while, and then, softly, "I can feel what you feel too, you know, including the part that doesn't completely hate me anymore." Elena didn't respond, didn't need to. The bond didn't lie. By sunset, they reached Allied territory, a border patrol that recognized the Alpha King and immediately offered escort. Word was sent ahead. They'd survived. But as they traveled under guard toward the nearest pack house, Elena knew the real challenge was just beginning. They were bonded now, connected. She would feel every emotion, every thought, every choice he made, and he would feel hers. She'd saved his life and trapped them both, and somehow, terrifyingly, she didn't completely regret it. The Allied pack, Silver Ridge, welcomed them with the cautious enthusiasm of wolves who weren't sure if they were hosting their king or his prisoner. Elena couldn't blame them for the confusion. The bond between her and Dmitri was visible in the way they unconsciously orbited each other, in the half-finished sentences and shared glances. It was uncomfortable and intimate and impossible to ignore. "We've secured the palace," Alpha Markov of Silver Ridge reported during the emergency council meeting. He was an older wolf, gray-muzzled and scarred. "Most of the rogues fled when they realized the king had escaped. The ones who remained were dealt with." "Casualties?" Dmitri asked. He sat at the head of the table, and Elena noticed he'd automatically saved the seat beside him for her. Through the bond, she felt his assumption that she belonged there, and her own confused acceptance of it. 37 dead, mostly guards and staff. Another 40 wounded." Elena felt Dmitri's grief and guilt like a physical blow. She kept her face neutral, but her hand moved, almost unconsciously, to touch his arm. The contact steadied him. "I want a full investigation," Dmitri said. "Marcus didn't act alone. Find his co-conspirators." "Already." "Underway, Your Majesty." The meeting continued. Logistics, security measures, plans for rebuilding. Elena only half listened. She was too distracted by the constant awareness of Dmitri through the bond. The way she could feel his exhaustion, his determination, his slowly building resolve to do something she couldn't quite identify. When the meeting finally ended and they were shown to private quarters, separate rooms, though Elena wasn't sure why they bothered given the bond made privacy impossible, Dmitri caught her arm. "Walk with me?" he asked. "Do I have a choice?" "Always." They walked through Silver Ridge's gardens, lit by moonlight and soft lanterns. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like waiting for an axe to fall. "I've been thinking," Dmitri said finally, "about what you said in the forest, about change." "And?" "You were right. I can't undo what I've done, can't bring back your brother or my victims, but I can stop being the king my fear made me." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "I'm going to recall the families my uncle destroyed, all of them. Publicly admit I was deceived and offer full restitution." Through the bond, Elena felt his terror at the vulnerability this would require, and his determination to do it anyway. "Your enemies will call it weakness," she said quietly. "Then they're not paying attention." He touched her face, gentle. "You're living proof that strength isn't the absence of fear, or doubt, or regret. It's moving forward despite them, doing what's right, even when it's hard. Don't make me your inspiration. I'm not that noble. You saved my life, multiple times. You blood bonded with a man you hated, past tense, mostly." His surprise rippled through the bond. "Mostly?" "Don't let it go to your head." But she couldn't help smiling slightly. "You're still arrogant and autocratic and way too comfortable with making unilateral decisions. But you're trying, and that counts for something." They stood in the garden, the bond humming between them, and Elena realized with a start that she could feel his attraction to her. Had been feeling it for a while, actually, beneath all the other emotions. It was careful, hesitant, laced with guilt and uncertainty. And more terrifying, she could feel her own response. The unwilling fascination, the way her pulse quickened when he was close, the dangerous warmth in her chest when he looked at her like she mattered. "This bond," she said carefully. "What happens now?" "I don't know. I've never heard of enemies bonding. Usually it's mates or packmates who—" He stopped. "Elena, I need you to know I don't expect anything from you. The bond doesn't mean—" "I know what it means." She stepped back, needing space even though the bond made true distance impossible. "And I know what it doesn't mean. We're stuck together, but we don't have to be together," he finished. "I know." The disappointment that flashed through the bond, from him or her, she couldn't tell, was quickly suppressed. "I should go," Elena said. "It's been a long day." "Elena," he caught her hand. "Whatever happens, whatever we become, thank you for giving me a chance to be better." She looked at their joined hands, at the man who destroyed her life and somehow become someone she couldn't quite hate anymore. "Don't waste it," she said, and left before she could do something stupid like stay. 6 months later, Elena stood in the remodeled throne room of the Crystal Palace and tried not to fidget. The past half-year had been a whirlwind. Dmitri had kept his promise. He'd recalled the families his uncle had destroyed, publicly admitted his mistakes, offered restitution. The political fallout had been significant, but somehow he'd weathered it. Some said it was because his advisors were brilliant. Elena knew it was because he'd stopped ruling through fear and started ruling through something more complicated. Justice tempered with mercy. Strength with wisdom. She'd helped. Couldn't help it, really, with the bond keeping them in constant contact. She'd become his unofficial advisor, the person who told him when he was being an idiot and helped him navigate the politics he'd never learned, because he'd been too busy surviving. And somewhere along the way, they'd become friends. More than friends, if she was honest. But neither of them had acted on it. The bond was too complicated, their history too fraught. They danced around each other, professional and careful, and ignored the growing tension between them. "You're thinking too loud," Dmitri murmured beside her. They were seated on the dais. She'd refused a throne, but he'd insisted on a seat of equal height beside his own. A statement about her position at court. "I'm thinking about how annoying you are." Liar. Through the bond, he felt her amusement. The council meeting was routine. Trade agreements, border disputes, the usual bureaucracy of running a kingdom. Elena only half listened, more interested in observing how Dmitri handled each issue. He was different now, still commanding, still alpha, but there was a thoughtfulness to his decisions that hadn't existed before. "Regarding the petition from House Markson," Dmitri said, "I believe we should grant the reduced tariffs. Elena?" Every head in the council turned to her. She'd gotten used to it, the shock of a king asking his advisor's opinion publicly, treating her word as equal to his own. "I disagree," she said calmly. "House Markson has been pushing for reduced tariffs for years, while simultaneously lobbying against infrastructure improvements that would benefit all houses. If we grant this, we set a precedent of rewarding self-interest over community benefit." One of the council members, a traditionalist who'd never liked Elena's influence, spoke up. "With respect, Miss Ashford, you're not qualified to make economic policy decisions." "With respect, Councillor Vren," Dmitri's voice went cold. "You don't get to question my advisor's qualifications. Elena, what do you suggest?" "A compromise. Reduce tariffs for House Markson, but only if they commit to funding a percentage of the infrastructure improvements. They benefit from the community, they contribute to it." "Done," Dmitri nodded to his scribe. "Make it so." The meeting continued, but Elena caught Vren's sour expression. Through the bond, she felt Dmitri's amusement and his iron determination to back her, always. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. After the meeting, as the council dispersed, Vren made the mistake of approaching them privately. "Your Majesty, I must insist." "No," Dmitri said flatly. "You must do nothing of the sort. The girl's influence over you is inappropriate." "The woman," Elena corrected coldly, "is standing right here. If you have something to say about me, say it to my face." Vren sputtered. "You've bewitched him." "Counselor Vren," Dmitri's voice was soft, deadly. "You're dismissed from this council. Effective immediately." The chamber went silent. "You can't," Vren started. "I can, and I am. You've questioned Elena's authority for the last time. Security will escort you out." After Vren was removed, still protesting, Elena turned to Dmitri. "That was excessive." "That was necessary. He's been undermining you for months." I know you can handle it, but you shouldn't have to. Not from my own counsel." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Elena, you're the best thing that's happened to this kingdom. To me. And I won't let anyone diminish that." Through the bond, she felt what he wasn't saying. Felt the depth of his regard, his admiration, his... "Don't," she said softly. "Don't what?" "Don't look at me like that. Don't make this more complicated than it already is." "Elena, I should go. I have that meeting with the Greyhaven delegation." She fled, again, like she'd been doing for 6 months, whenever things got too intense, too real, too close to admitting what they both knew was happening between them. But she could feel his frustration through the bond, and his determination. Things were coming to a head. They both knew it. The confrontation came 3 days later. Elena was in her rooms. She'd been given a suite in the palace, though she spent as little time there as possible, when Dmitri knocked. She considered not answering, but the bond made hiding pointless. "Come in." He entered, and she could feel his resolve through the bond before he spoke. "We need to talk." "About?" "Us. This." He gestured between them. "You keep running." "I'm not running." "You're terrified. I can feel it. And you know what? I'm terrified too. But we can't keep doing this dance." Elena sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly exhausted. "What do you want me to say? That I don't hate you anymore?" "I don't." "That I've come to respect you?" "I have." "That watching you transform from tyrant to decent king has been impressive?" "It has been." But my brother is still dead. My parents are still broken. And I'm still the girl whose life you destroyed because you were too proud to admit you were wrong." "I know." He sat beside her, careful to maintain distance. "And I will regret that until the day I die." "But Elena..." "But what? We're bonded, so we should be together? That's not how this works." "No, that's not what I'm saying." He turned to face her fully. "I'm saying that despite everything, despite the hate and the pain and the history, I'm falling in love with you. And I can feel through the bond that you feel something too. And I think we owe it to ourselves to figure out what that means." Elena's breath caught. Through the bond, she could feel the truth of his words, the vulnerability it cost him to say them. "You're an idiot," she said. "Probably." "I don't want to be with you because of the bond, because of obligation or convenience or political advantage." "Neither do I." "Then why?" "Because you make me better. Because you challenge me and frustrate me and make me laugh when I think I've forgotten how. Because when I imagine my future, you're in it, arguing with me about policy decisions and calling me an arrogant ass when I deserve it." Despite herself, Elena laughed. "That's the worst love confession I've ever heard." "It's honest." "I know," she sighed. "Dmitri, I don't know if I can do this. Trust you. Trust us. What if you revert to the tyrant you were?" "Then you'll call me out on it. You'll keep me accountable. That's what partners do." "Partners?" "If you want. If you'll have me." Not as your king, but as your whatever we become. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the man who'd held her while she cried, who'd listened to stories about her brother, who'd fought beside her and nearly died for her, who'd changed, was changing, because she'd demanded it. I still don't completely forgive you, she said. I know. And I still hate you sometimes. Good. I'd be worried if you didn't. And if we do this, if we try this, I need you to know that the bond doesn't obligate me to stay. If you become that tyrant again, I walk away, bond or no bond. I know. I wouldn't want it any other way. Elena studied his face, feeling his sincerity through the bond, feeling her own tangled emotions, the residual anger, the growing affection, the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this tragedy. Okay, she said finally. Okay? Let's try. See what happens, but slowly. And I swear to the moon, if you get weird and possessive just because we're bonded. He kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, and when she didn't pull away, it deepened into something that made her forget why she'd been resisting for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena laughed breathlessly. I still hate you, you know. Good, Dmitri said against her lips. I'd be worried if you didn't. Outside, the moon rose over the Crystal Palace, and two broken souls, bound by tragedy, healed by time, finally stopped running from each other and toward something that looked surprisingly like home. 2 years later, Elena stood in the throne room during a council meeting and tried not to smile as Dmitri made what was objectively a terrible proposal. Absolutely not, she said firmly, cutting him off mid-sentence. The entire council collectively held their breath. They still weren't used to the king's mate openly disagreeing with him in public forums. Elena, you can't just unilaterally decide to restructure the entire trade system without consulting the affected houses first. That's exactly the kind of autocratic nonsense I've spent 2 years training out of you. I wasn't being autocratic. You were absolutely being autocratic. You said, and I quote, I've decided. Dmitri pinched the bridge of his nose. Perhaps I could have phrased it better. Perhaps you could have actually consulted people before making sweeping declarations. Again. Through the bond, she felt his exasperation mixed with amusement and grudging admiration. He'd never admit it publicly, but he liked it when she pushed back. Needed it, even. Fine, he said. We'll form a committee to study the issue and make recommendations. Thank you, Your Majesty. You're insufferable. You say that like it's a complaint. The council, after 2 years, had learned to simply accept that their king and his mate had a dynamic that worked, even if it was unconventional. Most of them found it refreshing. A few, like the traditionalists, still grumbled, but their objections held less weight now that Elena had proven herself invaluable. After the meeting, as they walked back to their private chambers, they'd officially made it a year ago, much to the court's relief. Dmitri caught her hand. You undermined me in front of the entire court, he said, but his tone was affectionate. You were being an arrogant ass in front of the entire court. I really thought you'd be less defiant once we were officially mated. Elena stopped, turned to face him, and smiled. Then you mated the wrong woman. No. He pulled her close, his voice dropping to something intimate and warm. I mated exactly the right one. The kiss was slow, deep, familiar. 2 years of partnership, of learning each other, of building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. When they finally broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. I still hate you sometimes, you know. Good, Dmitri murmured. I'd be worried if you didn't. And as they walked together through the palace, no longer enemies, no longer quite what they'd been, but something entirely new, Elena thought about her brother, about how he would have liked the man Dmitri had become. about how grief never fully faded, but could transform into something that didn't hurt quite so much. About how sometimes the most unlikely bonds were the ones that healed us. "What are you thinking?" Dmitri asked, feeling her emotion shift through their connection. "That I'm glad I saved you," she said honestly, even though it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Second stupidest. Oh? The stupidest was falling in love with me. Elena laughed, bright and genuine. "You're absolutely right. Worst decision ever. And yet, here you are. And yet, here I am." They walked in comfortable silence, bonded and bound. No longer enemies, but something infinitely more complicated and infinitely more real. Behind them, the sun set over the Crystal Palace. Ahead, whatever came next, they would face together.